This is TLV1.
The Tel Aviv Review with Gilad Halpern.
Hello and welcome to the Tel Aviv Review, a program dedicated to the word, to the thought and to debate, brought to you by the Leer Jerusalem Institute, which promotes humanistic, democratic and liberal values in the social discourse in Israel. I'm your host, Gilad Halpern, and every week I'll be engaging in close encounters of the intellectual kind with writers and scholars, or simply people of all types and vocations who have done something to make our lives a tad more interesting. My guest today teaches German history at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, and he was one of the speakers at a roundtable discussion organized by the Leer Institute entitled The Red Lines of Israeli Democracy, in the wake of the public outcry and government clampdown on civil society groups like Breaking the Silence as well as others. Professor Moshe Zimmermann, hello and welcome to the Tel Aviv Review.
Good morning.
So government officials and other elements in Israel's civil society have been laboring to restrict the scope and legitimacy of human rights organizations in this country by a range of measures, from advertising campaigns to legislation, which prompted critics to often evoke a comparison to Europe of the 1930s, especially to the Weimar Republic on the eve of the Nazi takeover. My question to you, as a historian of Germany, how valid do you think this comparison is?
The comparison is very valid, no doubt about it. You have, in both cases, a democracy that is fighting an onslaught from the right wing, which is maybe a real threat for democracy. We know what happened in Germany. We know what's going on in Israel. We hope very much that what happened in Germany is not going to be repeated in Israel, but at least we have to admonish. We have to take care about the facts and clarify the situation. This is where I am as an historian. I know that as an historian, comparison is always a method that I'm using. Comparison is not a way of saying A is identical to B. It says only that there are elements in phenomenon A which may be comparable to certain elements in phenomenon B, and one has to think about the way in which one can learn something from this comparison.
Okay, so please unpack this for us. What are really the patterns that you see in today's Israel of 2016 that are parallel to those in Germany of the early 1930s?
Well, there are many parallels, starting with the basics, the approach to the notion of the nation, of the people, in Germany, Volk. If the approach is a more organistic one, not individualistic, then of course you think about some kind of an organism, which is the folk, which is the people. In Israel you say Am Yisrael, and everything that is endangering this organism is something that you have to get rid of. We know what happened to those elements which were defined as not belonging to the organism in Germany, the Jews in the first place. And we know how Israel is relating, let's say, to the Arabs of the state of Israel as something which is foreign to the real hardcore of the state, which is the people of Israel, which is the Jewish people alone. Well, there you have something to start with.
But you also see that in other places, right? I think maybe the comparison to pre-Nazi Germany is a bit hysterical, because you see those elements, those patterns in other countries as well. I don't know, France in the early 20th century, the late 19th century, around the Dreyfus affair, and a number of other comparisons. I fear that the comparison to pre-Nazi Germany is there to stun and shock us by way of using an extreme example.
Well, we are not comparing only to pre-Nazi Germany or later to Nazi Germany. We are comparing the phenomenon here and there. And we compare, of course, Israel not only to Germany of the early 30s, but also to France during the time of the Dreyfus trial, or to other situations, be it in the United States or in Eastern Europe. So the one comparison doesn't say that you can't do the other comparison or add other comparisons. But of course, it has a very striking effect. I know that it is sometimes counterproductive, because the moment you mention Germany, not to speak of Nazi Germany, then of course people just shut their eyes and say, okay, this is something
it's not only
which is
that.
incomparable, and we don't listen
It's
anymore.
not only that, because people expect a Nazi takeover, and when that doesn't happen, so they kind of make do or condone the illiberal elements that already exist.
Again, I'm an historian, and as an historian, I know that the comparison doesn't go too far or doesn't have to go that far. We are interested in the main issues that make this comparison viable. And this is why I think we have to go on with this case of Germany, Weimar Germany, because it may teach us some kind of a lesson in order not to get at the point in which Germany really departed from democracy and started a really horrible policy of extermination of people inside and outside Germany. So let's go back to the basics. So one thing is, of course, the idea of the folk as an organism. The other one is defining everybody who does not belong to the folk as an enemy, not only as a stranger, but also as an enemy. And then, of course, you add the internal enemies, those who are within the framework of the state, and the external ones. The more enemies you have, the better. This idea, this mentality is something also which is comparable. We know what happens now with Israel. We are looking for those traitors. This is the enemy. He is a traitor from within. And we try to eliminate him, or at least to fight him, also in a very extreme way. And of course, we look at the world and come to the conclusion that everybody is against us, and then we are very satisfied. We know that our preconceived idea of being alone against the whole world is a valid one.
And more in terms of practice, I would say, in terms of how the ideology is being executed and implemented. Would you say that there are, in Israel today, fascist elements operating?
Well, if I say fascist, again, I am in a very broad comparison, because fascism is not only German. Fascism is originally an Italian phenomenon, and there are many fascist elements outside Italy too, and in Israel. If you look at the history of fascism in Israel, you see how, let's say, welcome Mussolini, for instance, was for a certain group within the Israeli Zionist society of the 30s. So it's, I think, something which is not to be contested, that there are fascist elements in the history of Zionism and in Israeli society also today. But what I intend to show is very specific elements, if you are talking about how they practice their preconceived ideas from the right wing in Israel as in other places. And of course you see how they behave or how they relate to the enemies, how to relate to the traitors. Why do they define the others as traitors? And then, of course, we have some very conspicuous examples. The moment that you try to fight art, culture, literature by the order of the government, if you try to put everything under government censorship, then of course you are already in the best way to behave the way that those people in the 30s did, also in Germany. I brought a good example. There was, before the Nazis came to power in January 1933, one instance in which a member of the Nazi party became a minister of a regional government in Germany. It was 3 years before the Nazis came to power in Germany. He became the Minister of Culture and Interior. So what does he do? First thing, he is fighting the presence of the book Im Westen nichts Neues, no news
On the Western Front.
on the Western Front, in school libraries. So he doesn't want school children, pupils, to read this book.
Because it was a defeatist book.
Because it was against the army, against Germany from the perspective of the right wing in Germany. So this is a way to fight opposition or to fight a certain trend in society by an order given by the minister. I think this comparison shows how something starts and where it may go. What happened also later when a film was made with the same title, the Nazis and the right wing in Germany started a series of demonstrations in order to get the film off the screen, and they were successful because they were brutal, they were violent, and they succeeded. And this is again something which is comparable and something which might indicate where things may go if you go the same way as those people in the 30s.
Right. But at the moment in Israel, we see maybe the very first signs of that. It's not quite there yet, because you see, it's not outright censorship. Breaking the Silence and the other human rights groups are not being criminalized. Nobody's outlawing them. They're just waging a campaign against them. Wouldn't you say that it's, part of a healthy democracy to speak against your ideological enemies?
There is a slogan that the Germans learned to know, which is "Wehret den Anfängen." Be careful with the beginnings. Mm-hmm. Don't let things develop that far that you can't stop them anymore.
It's a slippery slope.
So you have to be alert from the start. And this is where we are. Of course, we know, again, I am an historian, I know the tempi of history are different. Mm-hmm. In Germany, we have a period of 15 years, which led us from the revolution in 1918 to the counter-revolution of 1933. History does not repeat itself. That is, we do not expect in 15 years something which is the same as happened in Germany. God beware. But we see a tendency, and the tendency is an accumulation of steps made which are, I believe, dangerous to democracy or to liberal democracy. And this is where we have to be on the alert.
Yes. One thing perhaps that is really different if you take Israel today and Germany of the 1930s is perhaps the resilience of Israeli democracy. Unlike Germany, Weimar Germany, Israel has been a vibrant and solid democracy for about, a liberal democracy more or less, for about 70 years now. Doesn't it really change the perspective completely that, unraveling the Israeli democracy would be a lot harder than what it was in Germany?
We try to make a comparison, and by doing this comparison we come at the conclusion that Israeli society is more resilient than German society in the 20s. This is a compliment to Israeli society, of course, but it is no guarantee against some development which might be really detrimental to Israeli society, no doubt about that. And this is where we stand and try to divert the attention of Israelis from the topic of resilience to the dangers which are awaiting us behind the corner. Because people are not always aware to the meaning of certain steps that are taken by the government or by other agency of society. So this is where we are.
What about the research community in Germany? German historians of Germany, do they take in any interest in what's going on in Israel now, and do they subscribe to that comparison as well?
The intellectuals and people who are academics are, of course, attentive to what happens in Israel. Let's say even more than to what happened in other places, because Judaism is something which rings a bell in Germany. So they listen to what's happening here, and they are usually, those people that I know, usually critical, because they see that there is a basic flaw in Israeli society. We are the masters of people, the Palestinians, without getting the permission to be the masters. There is no doubt no democracy. Their democracy stops.
In the West Bank, you mean?
In the West Bank. So this is why people are so attentive, and as academics they have the tools also to express the criticism. This is something, and I can say about German colleagues.
No, but when it comes to the internal debate in Israel, what you and I are discussing now, the liberal tendencies.
And this is why they are also attentive to the internal discussion in Israel, because they know more or less those people with whom they usually correspond, and they are quite surprised by the fact that the right-wing nationalistic attitude is prevalent in Israel.
Mm-hmm.
The question that they ask is, how come that you, those people we know, historians, philosophers and so on, do not have enough power to convince the majority in Israel?
Mm-hmm.
Because this is very different from the situation in Germany at the moment. Germany is an open society. Germany is a society that tried to learn the lessons, the universal lessons of the history of National Socialism.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they are now open to the...
But more importantly, people actually listen to intellectuals in Germany?
In Germany, intellectuals play a very important role.
Hmm.
You see it if you read the press, if you listen to the radio or the TV. They are also involved in the social networks. And I think if you follow this example, you expect the academics to have more influence in a state which is apparently comparable like Israel.
Mm-hmm. That's all very interesting, and I thank you very much for this discussion, Professor Moshe Zimmermann, historian of Germany at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, and one of the participants in an event organized by the Leer Institute last week entitled The Red Lines of Israeli Democracy. Thank you very much.
My pleasure.
That brings us to the end of our show today. Thank you very much for listening. Also, big thanks to Alex Benish, the technical producer of this show. I'm Gilad Halpern, signing off here in Tel Aviv. Do join us again next week for another edition of the Tel Aviv Review. And until then, goodbye.